welcome to the Friday Show, brought to you, as always, by Woodbine. This Saturday at Woodbine Mohawk, the standardbred track, Saturday night, there's a mandatory payout on the super high five, $253,326,000 jackpot going in. And then Saturday at Woodbine Thoroughbred Racetrack in the afternoon, it's the Grade 2 Kennedy Road. There's a field of 10 led by Patches O'Houlihan, who is 6 for 6 this year, going for his 7th consecutive victory. You don't see that very often.
Yeah, you got to think there's a sovereign award in play here.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'm Ray Pollock, joined as always by Bloodstock editor Joe Nevels, and our special guest this week is Rich Perloff, who just recently ended a 22-year run on TVG, FanDuel TV. And Rich, I have to say, we've talked a few times, but I feel like I know you from all of those Monday and Tuesday shifts where you were on for several hours covering the tracks that may not be the most important tracks, but you did a fantastic job, not just on those shows, but throughout your career. Welcome to the Friday Show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And by the way, I'm probably the only person in this assemblage who actually saw Kennedy Road run several times.
You know, I saw the sign off last Sunday with Todd, and he mentioned ACAC.
Yep.
Now what year was that, and when was Kennedy Road? Were they in the same?
I think Kennedy Road was just a little bit later on, but
Okay.
ACAC, I mean, if pressed to do so, I could tell you the very first day that I ever went to the racetrack, because my dad took me to Santa Anita, and on my first visit to the races, I saw ACAC lose the only race he would lose in 1971. I think it was then the Palos Verdes. It was being run at 5.5 furlongs, and he lost to a horse by the name of Jungle Savage. And from that point forward, he would run the table. And really, if you look at his 1971 campaign, they could have given him the turf Eclipse, or what was the equivalent of the Eclipse that year too, because Fager won it in 1968 with, I think, only one turf victory on his resume, and ACAC did the same. So he was far and away the best horse when I was just learning what it meant to be a good horse. So he's always had a very special place in my heart.
If I'm not mistaken, the Palos Verdes used to be the opening day feature at Santa Anita on December 26th, right?
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't the date when I saw that race, but that may be.
So between the time you saw ACAC and and started at then TVG, now FanDuel, what was the path that got you from LA back to LA?
Oh boy.
And keep in mind, we're a 20-minute show here, but
yeah,
you don't have you have a little different story than a lot of people.
I'll skip around. I knew on day one, and that was my first visit to the racetrack. My dad had not been since he was in the service in World War II. We were both novices. We walked in. We bought a daily racing form for $1 because that's what he kind of remembered you were supposed to do. And we both looked at that thing, and it was hieroglyphics. I mean, for novices, the daily racing form past performances are just so confusing. But I think we stayed for 4 races. He was betting $10 to win.
Wow.
He picked 3 winners. We picked 3 winners. He bought me a new bicycle, and I thought, where's this been all my life, right? And I spent the last half century paying for that bicycle, I guess you could say. When I get interested in something, anything, I'm a total immersion kind of a guy, and the whole process of handicapping and race analysis was so fascinating to me that I just started devouring any literature I could find, whatever handicapping books I could get my hands on. I just wanted to know more about it. And really between that first visit and when I came on with TVG in late 2001, that's what I was doing wherever I happened to be. And I lived all over the country for various reasons, whether, work related or school related. Wherever I was, you bet that I knew where the nearest racetrack was. And I just kept current with it. kept my hand in. And then, we're fast forwarding now till the late, let's see, I came on in 2001. So late 1990s, because TVG launched in 1999 in July. Somebody that I knew through my association with the races sent me a copy of the print ad that they had been running in the trade publications. And they said, we're looking for, on-air personalities and producers and researchers. And I thought, okay, this looks like something. I have a background in racing. I had what I would consider a good layperson's understanding of the game. And I had the performance background from all my years doing theater. So I sent a cover letter. I sent a resume. Now, I'm not going to say I lied, but I will say that I kind of fudged my experiences with racing to make it sound more like it was professional or work related. And lo and behold, within a couple of days, I get a phone call from Dave Weaver, who was then the head of the research department. And he said, well, we're interested in you, and I'm sitting in my office at Ohio University having this conversation. I was teaching in the theater arts department there in Athens, Ohio. And what I remember about that conversation in particular, and Weaver claims not to remember this, but I know he said it. At one point he said, are you a professor? And I said, well, I'm an assistant professor of theater. And he said, I don't know if we can match your salary demands. I said, dude, you have a very funny idea of how academia works. I said, trust me, on the low end of your salary range, you're doing me a favor. So, but the thing was, there was one last hurdle that had to be cleared. When they were speaking to me, TVG was in aggressive expansion mode, and then the piece of legislation that would have made computer and telephone wagering legal in California was vetoed by then Governor Gray Davis. And from what I've been told, TVG almost overnight went into slashing mode. A lot of people lost their jobs during that period of time. And I just kept communicating, trying to figure out what they had in mind for me. And it was a long road, because that was either 1999 or maybe 2000, and I didn't actually come on board until November 11th of 2001. That was my first day.
So you have the background in teaching, you have the background in acting. Had you had any experience with sort of behind the desk reporting, like what you would be facing at TVG, like camera, desk, No, that was all.
And see, to me, that's the most miraculous part of my experience. And look, I don't know it was because of anything that I brought to the table or just because we were always a little bit thinly staffed, but that was such a quick evolution, and all credit. And believe me, I've acknowledged this guy many, many times over the years for having given me this career that I've had. Tony Alivato, who was then our boss at TVG. Well, we used to have these weekly production meetings, and on Mondays and Tuesdays, which most of the major racetracks were on a Wednesday through Sunday schedule back then. So Mondays and Tuesdays, we would do what they called radio show. We would have the track feeds of whoever was running, and we would have analysts in the studio, but they wouldn't turn the cameras on. So you just heard the voiceover. And at this production meeting, Tony asked, does anybody want to take a crack at that? Because they just needed people to do it. I put my hand up. I did that for a couple of weeks. And then one day somebody called in sick, and they started plugging holes, and the domino effect ensued. And they came to me and said, would you like to do an hour on the air, actually in front of the cameras? And I said, yeah, sure. So as I recall, I had to run home and get a coat and a tie. But I went out and I did an hour on the air. And I remember leaving the studio. This was our old studio up on Olympic Boulevard in Los Angeles. And our senior producer, who was a guy named Dan Noel at the time, was waiting at the studio door, and he said, "Hey, you're good at this." And I said, "Dan, I've played leading roles in Shakespeare in front of thousands of people live. Sitting behind a desk and talking about horses just doesn't strike me as daunting at all." And that's where it started, and I for several years, they kept me with a foot in both camps. I was hired as a researcher. I was not hired to go on the air, but now I'm starting to go on the air. They still want me to perform my research department duties until we finally got to a point where I said, "Look, pick a lane. Tell me what one job I have here, because you're kind of killing me with the double duty." And that's when I became full-time broadcaster. But to getting back to the original question, I was rough. I mean, I was the guy who would be looking at the wrong camera for half a minute. People are in my ear going, no, camera two. Or people would talk to me from the booth and I would answer out loud.
Oh no.
No, don't talk to us. I mean, I had to learn all that stuff. And there was one other development that I consider to be really significant for me. I'll mention no names here, but a former producer at TVG. I worked a lot of shifts with this guy early on in my development as a broadcaster. And he used to say, and he knew about my performance background. He said, when you're in front of the camera, you have to play a character. You're in character. You have to. And I came to realize that he was completely wrong. He was absolutely wrong, because what I found is that I had to be more me. I had to, because that's what I had to sell. That's what all of us have to sell, is a genuine enthusiasm and love for the game. That's what I need to communicate. I don't need to, have layers of artificiality between me and that. And I'm pleased to believe that that's what resonated with the viewers. I was speaking the truth as I knew it. And I think people at least appreciated the consistency of what I was talking about, because I didn't have to remember, what lie I told last week.
One of the things that I've found most interesting about your shifts is the interaction you had with viewers. They would at you on Twitter or email you or whatever, and it was almost like a back and forth. A lot of shows.
Yeah. No, I love that. The way that I've described it over the years, Ray, is that for me, horse racing is best when it's a social event. That's how I enjoyed it best, going to the races with my friends. And what, I think that what goes along with that is, God forbid that I go with my friends to the racetrack and all we do is talk about the races. That's not how it goes. You've done most of your handicapping. You're going to share your opinions back and forth, and you're going to make sure you get to the windows on time to make your plays. But then you're talking about stuff. And I was perfectly content during those 4-hour solo shifts on Monday and Tuesday to, go off road and talk about stuff. If people wanted to have the conversation about their favorite horses of all time, if people wanted to talk about their favorite racing movies, other movies, we could talk about whatever it happened to be. I was all for that, because to me, that's part of the experience. You never lose sight of the races that are in your shift, but there's time for the other stuff. We were never staffed to do a proper call-in show. That has other requirements that we couldn't accommodate. So Twitter and email were how we operated, and it got to the point, because I would ask people to send me a best bet, and I would diligently log them, and try to attend to them and put their analysis into the conversation as those races approached. It actually got to the point, and I told them on air, I said, I got to back off. I mean, I'm overwhelmed now. There's too much. We've gotten to the point where it's there's not enough of me and too much of all of you. But the interaction was that was obviously a key component of what we built over the time. And I'm still in communication with a lot of these folks. I mean, my Monday, Tuesday regulars, we still correspond.
That's fantastic.
They were instrumental in in me doing the thing that I guess I'm proudest of.
So those Monday, Tuesday races, those Monday, Tuesday tracks, those can often look a lot different than what people are used to seeing on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
Is there a particular track that you were fondest of in your time following that particular portion of the industry?
Yeah, 100% it would be Parks, or it was Philadelphia Park when I first started looking at it. And I think the reason for that is because that was an anchor track. They're on Mondays and Tuesdays, their racing schedule and their racing calendar, which is, it's a very extensive meeting they run.
Oh yeah.
There at Parks. I mean, they were always with me on Mondays and Tuesdays. So of necessity, I just learned a lot about the condition book there and the way the track plays, and I learned about all the human connections there that I had to be paying attention to. So yeah, I mean, probably more than anything out here in Southern California, Parks became my home track. And when I first visited there in 2019, it was astonishing. I mean, the reception I got there just blew my mind. But I'll tell you what, didn't blow anybody's mind more than Caton. Caton was there. She couldn't believe what was going on, because Caton's a superstar. Caton's been a superstar forever, and when she walks into a racetrack, everyone knows it. And I think she was a little bit taken aback by how much adulation was coming my way.
Well, I wanted to. What's next? Are you going back to the theater? Is that kind of where you're heading?
Well, see, I never left. I never left because I can't. I started going to the races, as I say, when I was 12 or 13. I started doing theater shortly thereafter.
Wow. Okay.
And these two things have been on parallel tracks for me ever since. They are the two enduring passions of my life. I don't know that I could, be entirely content without both of them operating. So the truth of the matter is, when I came to TVG, I put theater on the back burner, just because I wanted to make sure that I understood what was required of me in the new gig. And I should also put into the conversation that when I left my teaching job in Ohio to come back to Los Angeles, it was for personal and family reasons that made it imperative that I come back to Los Angeles. TVG was the vehicle that enabled me to make that happen very efficiently. But I waited probably for a couple of years until I was very confident that I knew how my schedule worked at TVG, and then I was back at auditions. And I would say since maybe 2004 or 5, I haven't stopped. I'm acting in or directing a couple of 3 shows a year for all that time. And the folks who build the schedules at TVG, they were very helpful to me. They were very, they helped me get the kind of schedule accommodations I needed to pull off the theater stuff. And I think that over time, they actually kind of dug it. People would come around and say, "Hey, are you doing any shows?" Because I think they understood that part of me was also a part of what I was doing for them. It was part of my on-air personality. So, in answer to your question, I never stopped, but now I intend to ramp it back up. Now as opposed to limiting myself to a couple or 3 productions a year, now I would like to start to string the jobs, back to back a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that these two things run on parallel tracks for you. Are there any skills either within the on-air and or handicapping, like the TVG side of your life and the acting side of your life? Did anything ever sort of commingle at all in terms of useful skills for one or the other?
Well, that's interesting. Well, certainly in terms of what I did on air, just picking a position and expressing it as vigorously and clearly as possible. That's this is what actors do all the time.
Yeah.
So that was, but in the other direction, I hadn't really thought about it, but now that you mention it, I think that textual analysis, when you're actually just mining a dramatic text for clues as to how you want to perform a particular role or what things you think are important as a director, that's not a whole lot different from moving around the past performances and picking up little tidbits of information that will ultimately lead to a selection. Yeah, I mean, it's there's information to be processed and distilled down into specific choices.
I like that.
Before you go, when you mentioned that when you first got involved, you went out and read all the books you could find. I'm sure it was Ainsley and things, and Davidowitz, and I think Picking Winners might have been a few years later, but from Andy Byer. What advice do you give to someone today that is caught the bug and say, hey, this is fun, but I want to learn more about how to actually handicap, to decipher the hieroglyphics in the form or thorograph or Ragozin or something like that? What's the best way for somebody to get started?
Well, the literature is still, the literature. I mean, I think that even something like Ainsley is, there's so much good fundamental information there. This was a question that cropped up all the time on those Monday and Tuesday programs, and I'd mention Ainsley, and I would mention Richard Eng's, betting on horse racing for dummies. I think people still need to read Andy Byer. That stuff was revolutionary. I mean, when I read Picking Winners, I think that was during my year in New York, and I actually made my own speed figures for one inner track meeting at Aqueduct. I thought I could do that because they only ran a certain number of distances, so that kept the project from being completely overwhelming. But so I think that there's a lot of good literature out there. The most important thing, I think, when I speak to novice handicappers is to tell them you need to become conversant in all of the major disciplines of handicapping. You need to understand about pace. You need to understand about class. I think you need to understand a little bit about pedigree, which is still kind of murky territory for a lot of people. But what all that adds up to is you have to be flexible. You can't, say, well, I'm a pace handicapper, and then try to force every race you look at into that template. I think that, and this is where, I've always advocated for handicapping being more art than science. That's how it is for me. That's the way I like it. Now, the numbers people, that's fine. They can do it their way. I'll do it my way. But I like to, with all of these, various ideas in mind, class and pace and pedigree and whatnot, I'd like to approach a race and let the race tell me which of my handicapping variables are most important, given what I see here. If I spot multiple need the lead types, okay, now I'm probably tilting towards pace. If I'm looking at 2-year-old first time starters going 2 turns on grass, a lot of pedigree information needs to be brought to bear. So that kind of flexibility, I think, is what separates the novice handicapper from the more complete handicapper, and that's kind of what I advocate.
Well, Rich, we could go on forever, because we've just started hitting into the stuff that I'm fascinated by, which is the mystery. Every 30 minutes there's a new mystery. That's the way I kind of look at it, and solving the mystery is what really brought me into the game. And
there's nothing like it. There's just nothing like it. I mean, if you're a handicapper and a horse player, you are in the business of predicting the future. And on those rare occasions when what happens on the racetrack absolutely aligns with what you saw in your mind's eye, there is nothing like that.
Big time.
It happened to me once. Yeah. Well, listen, thank you for the 22 years of handicapping and friendship that you brought to the airwaves at TVG and FanDuel, and we really appreciate you joining us this week on the Friday show, Rich. And I'll have to look at the theater section of Los Angeles and find out what you're doing next.
Just follow me on Twitter, because I'm not shy about self-promotion when I'm involved in something like that.
And that is what, at Rich Perloff?
Yeah, I think it's still Rich Perloff. I think I don't think I changed it to Richard, but
one or the other. Good enough. All right. Well, thanks again, and thanks to Woodbine for their sponsorship of the Friday show. And we'll see you next week for a special Thanksgiving edition with the Turkey Awards. We'll see you then.
Support award-winning independent horse industry journalism and become a Pollock Report Insider on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, insiders get access to exclusive Q&As with Pollock Report staff, insight behind our editorial process, exclusive opinions and on-site analysis, Pollock Report merch, and more. This is not a paywall. The website you know and love will always be the same. But if you want more, and you want to make our coverage even better, visit patreon.com/Pollock Report and become a Pollock Report Insider today.